Let's go through some of the biggest highlights in Chapter 4. To start with, make sure that you're referencing the page numbers, as I may pause from time to time to point out key formulas or help with technology or vocabulary as we go. So this particular chapter starts on page 192, and as always, I encourage you to watch this overview video that you see right at the beginning of section 4A. A little bit further, we have, let's see, on page 194, some steps for making a budget. You can read through those and see how they apply in some of the examples below. Again, don't forget about the videos and extra examples that are provided for you in the eText. On page 197, here's a pretty good example of how you might use budgeting or comparison that goes back to some key skills that we learned in a previous chapter on unit conversion. So look through this example, cost of a car. You can try an example like it, or even watch the video of this particular example being worked through. And then one last note I made about this particular section is on page 199. There's lots of vocabulary here. Now there's vocabulary in other parts too, but this one particularly to insurance cost. Now I'm going to skip ahead to page 206. That's the next section. Again, make sure you watch this overview video to get a good idea of what this section's about. This section is really building for us the next couple of sections and what you see in the rest of this chapter. So this is very foundational stuff here. There's some vocabulary on page 207, a brief review of powers and roots, because as we look at compounded interest, we are finding an exponential growth to, like, say, for instance, a savings problem. If we want to solve a problem with an exponent, then, or power, rather, we then have to take a root. So it's really important that you know some of these basics. So review those about powers and roots. Up next, I made a note on page 209 that here's an important formula for the compound interest, where for interest paid in a year. Notice it tells us the formula, it tells us what each variable means, and you will see more variables as we go. Again, these formulas get a little bit more complex as we add more information to the problem, or as we consider more possibilities or more variables. And that one was on page 209. One note I wanted to make was when you see this information here about APR or any type of annual percentage rate, those percentage rates, almost always they'll say state them as a decimal in the formula. So make sure that you're converting them to a decimal to then use in a formula. You can see that's down here as an example. The APR is 4%, but they're going to use 0.04 within the problem, the decimal form of 4%. On skipping ahead to page 211, this is a good page about some technology that how you can use technology to help you with these kind of massive formulas. So it gives a step-by-step guide here of what to press when in order to get the correct output. And again, this is really if you don't want to have to write out a lot of work by hand on paper. Either way, you're following the order of operations, and that's a key note right here. Up next, I made a note of another formula on page 214. This is the compound interest formula for interest paid in times per year. So like, for instance, monthly compounding, daily compounding, things like that. There's a tech tidbit here on how you can use technology even with that kind of massive looking formula. And then one more formula to note on page 218. This one is continuously compounded interest. Notice that the formula is a little bit different. It involves this constant value E, which they do approximate for us. Oops, I thought I could highlight that, but that value E is approximated here. And there's some little notes over here on the side about E as well. You should be able to find that key on your calculator or in a Google calculator. Let's see, up next section starts on page 225. Again, there's an overview video I highly encourage you to watch. On the next page, there is the start of a formula here, savings plan formula with regular payments. Even though that formula looks even more involved, but remember, we are adding on layers each time with these formulas. Still, the idea is that we're taking compounded interest and we're trying to see how much money we could save as we add payments even to a savings account, for instance. To help you with that, on page 230, there is a technology piece here about exactly how would you type that into the calculator, again, following the order of operations. On page 233, there's some more vocabulary. Again, there's vocabulary throughout these sections, but this one's kind of the important vocabulary here in the purple rectangle. And then as an example, I just wanted to highlight real quick how we can read some of the key findings that we may see on either online stock quotes or I believe there's another one for bonds as well in this section. This really breaks down how we can read this information that's given to us. On page 244, this is the beginning of the last section that we look at in chapter 4. Again, watch the video so that you got a good overview of this section, a little bit more depth than just this video. On page 245, you've got the formula that you're going to be working with this time, and this is to find the regular payment amount of a loan. On page 247, we see some technical information here. How would we type that into our calculator? Because yes, it looks kind of messy, but this is a good example to follow so that you're getting those keystrokes correct. And then overall, this particular section deals with things like loan payments, credit cards, mortgages. There's lots of good examples in this section. This one to me is probably one of the things that I use even personally outside of math class. I do these types of things with my own finances. So then last but not least, I wanted to point out page 290. This one's a good summary page that has all the formulas, key information, and key vocabulary with page numbers. So you could go back and see, what was that about investment returns again? That was on page 233. You could go back to that information there. So good luck as you work through these problems in chapter 4. Remember, please reach out to me by clicking on Ask My Instructor as you're in a particular problem in my math lab, and I will reply shortly with a video response.